Madam President and your cabinet, members of the Union, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here with you this evening. I was invited by the Union to share my experiences about what they called perennial opposition to the government in Uganda. And that's what I'm here to do. It is true that I have been in the opposition of the powers that be in Uganda for quite a long time. Certainly in the last 20 years, during the tenure of the current president, Mr. Museveni, who has been in power now for more than 33 years. And for that 20 years of opposition, I have obviously attracted quite a lot of hostility to myself and to those in a similar situation like I am. I am right now out on bail on very many of charges in various courts in Uganda, including treason. I have previously been charged with treason again. This is the second time I'm being charged with treason. I've been charged with terrorism, been charged with illegal possession of guns, with rape, and all kinds of manner of offenses. I've been shot and injured. I've been forced out of the country and lived in exile. And my brother has died in this process. We were together in prison at some stage. And so, yes, being in perennial opposition of a regime like I have been has a huge cost. But I have not been just in opposition to the Museveni regime. I actually did not take off to be a political actor. I studied medicine and I wanted to be a medical doctor. But during the study, during my course in the university, it was a very difficult time of Idi Amin, where there was gross abuses of human rights and impunity. And I was a victim of that during those days. So post Idi Amin, we were quite euphoric that things were going to turn around. And indeed, having gained some conscientization politically during the Amin period, I was a keen follower of the politics post Idi Amin, and I quickly associated with one of the new formations that emerged at that period, a political party that was started in my presence and led by the current leader, President Museveni. But the contestation for office in that election of 1980 was extremely rough, being moderated largely by the force of arms. And indeed, it was during the campaigns of that election that Mr. Museveni indicated that if the ruling Junta then, it was a military commission which was governing, that if it went ahead and rigged elections, he would go to war. And he lived up to his promise and went to war in 1981. Those of us who had supported him were in trouble. I was arrested in 1981 and nearly died in prison. And indeed, many of the people I was with in prison have never been seen again. I was lucky to escape. I went into exile in Kenya, but an annoyed person, determined that I will not die needlessly like I was about to that I should fight to change that, to end that kind of impunity and abuse of rights. And so I practiced a bit of medicine in Kenya as an exilee before joining the Bush War in 1982. And the Bush War is another story I can't go into now. Happily, it ended in 1986 successfully, leaving more than 500,000 people dead. And we came into government. That's when Mr. Museveni became president. And he made a famous speech at the doors of Parliament when he was being sworn in, saying that what was happening then was a fundamental change and not a mere change of guards.
Nobody should think that what is happening today or what has been happening in the last few days is a mere change of guards. This is not a mere change of guards. I think this is a fundamental change in the politics of our country. Because in Africa we have seen so much change that change has become meaningless. It's no longer change but merely turmoil. This group getting rid of that group and that group doing worse than the group it got rid of. Now, please, do not count us in that category of people. The National Resistance Movement, I think, is a clear-headed movement with clear objectives and with good membership. I think it makes a very big difference from the situation in which we were, where the very people in power were they themselves encouraging evil instead of trying to combat evil. I think this is a slightly different situation.
Now, I'll come back to that statement. I was then appointed into government in 1980 as a minister.
First of all, allow me to report that all the districts of Uganda are represented in this meeting through their various district executive committees. I wish to take this opportunity first and foremost to thank these members for their effort in making sure that they attended this important meeting in spite of the short time that was given by way of notice. Mr. President, I must report that these members who are gathered here are members who have given an immense contribution by way of sacrificing their own time, their own resources for the benefit of the people they represent.
And I worked as a government minister until 1990. We are supposed to organize a transition to a democratic dispensation, having won the war. And the transition period we had declared would be 4 years. We disagreed on how that transition would be managed. And the transition period didn't end until 10 years later and end in courts. So having disagreed, I was dismissed from government in 1990, the end of our original transitional period. And because I had become a soldier, I was conscripted to continue in the forces, and I commanded some units of our military until eventually I fought to be released and was finally released in 1999 when the current phase of my opposition started, now completely outside government. But what I want to focus on is not so much myself in these remarks that I am making. It is on the nature of the state that has created what I'm talking about. Because quite often I think there is some bit of a misunderstanding, and that's why even terms like opposition figure, opposition leader are used, because opposition means that there is government party and there is opposition party. And I would like to suggest that that is misnomerous in our situation. Our situation needs to be viewed with two elements in mind. The first one is that what we are talking about are really artificial nations that were created by coercive power. There were originally different nations within the current nations that were destroyed by force of guns, and new nations artificially created by force. And of course, you are familiar with that creation after the Berlin Conference and whatever. And these new nations destroyed our citizenship. We ceased being citizens. We became subjects of the new force that took over power. The force of guns that took over power was the sovereign. We were subjects. And that means that we lost all power of citizenship. We had no control over our wealth, of our resources. We had no control over decision making. We had no control over execution of whatever decisions or policies are made, and we had no control over adjudication. Those with guns had total control of all that. And of course, at that time, it was the British government. And we were subjects of the Queen. Now, of course, there was an internal struggle all over the territories that were controlled by the British Empire then. I think the misfortune that some of our nations have is that the struggle to regain citizenship did not mature, that we built enough internal capacity to dispose the guns that had taken over our power. I think what happened was that because of the different struggles that the British Empire was facing, it was decided that there should be negotiated independence for some of the territories where our countries fall. There was negotiated independence before our internal dynamics could afford us the ability to assert our will. What happened, therefore, is that we came from the artificial countries led by the sovereign, a real sovereign, to an artificial country led by an artificial sovereign. Because here were now ordinary peasants, some who had qualified to become teachers, to become trade union leaders, being given power and the guns that control it, and having all power unto themselves when they did not have the infrastructure, the experience, whatever goes with having that power. So power did not shift from the colonial administration to the people of Uganda. It shifted from the colonial administration to some new kings, some new sovereigns that were now in control of the forces that were left behind. And this is why, in fact, I think in many of the independent African countries, there has been even times when people reminisce favorably to the colonial era, because there was some semblance of more order and and development than there has been under the independent states. And so, citizenship has not been reclaimed in many of these countries. Power still resides with those with guns that succeeded the ones that formed the states. That's why in a country like Uganda, no leader has ever handed over power peacefully to another. Every leader has been bombed out of office. And whoever has come into office has bombed his way into office. So citizens, or would-be citizens, are irrelevant in these processes. They do not espouse leadership. They do not determine how the country will be managed, and so on and so forth. It is the gunmen. And of course, in the intervening period, because of the international systems and demands, there has been a tendency to organize elections, not so that citizens may participate and determine what happens in these countries, but to justify themselves. And so we have elections that are totally fraud. It's just a facade. And not surprisingly, even as you may have heard very recently, we had governments that had been overwhelmingly elected only recently. General Bashir had been elected with 94% of the vote. Robert Mugabe was re-elected with 61% of the vote. Bouteflika was re-elected with 81% of the vote. Only for a short while later, the country is to explode, demanding that those systems end. So the elections that we go through, in which I have participated 4 times as a presidential candidate, are elections that I participate in well aware that at the end of the election, I'm not going to be announced as a winner. And should some miracle happen that I am announced, that I will not be expecting General Museveni to come and hand over power to me and retreat to his village. So, what then is our engagement? So, our engagement is really, in simple terms, a struggle. Having not been in politics previously, I actually did not understand the dynamics of all these processes. I have come to confront them in reality as the situation has been swinging me around. When I went to the war, I thought that there were those who had bad guns that were being used against our people, and that we could get good guns to depose the bad guns and do the needful, hand over power to the people. As it turned out, and I learned the hard way, which is what I was saying, that Mr. Museveni had said there was not a mere change of guards, that there was a fundamental change. The reality is that if you take up guns and fight other guns, there can only be a mere change of the guards. There are no, because in fact the war weakens the society even more and renders the society much less able to demand accountability of the new warlords. It makes their situation even more disastrous than it was before the war that we went through. So what we have been suggesting to our people, and what is ongoing now, is that there must be a struggle, that a vote on its own, organized by the military junta, however clothed, will not lead to citizens regaining their citizenship. or Ugandans or whoever they are regaining their citizenship. That these people who lost their citizenship, who have no control over their wealth, who have no control over decision making, who have no control over adjudication and so on, that they will not regain those until they struggle. And so there are three processes that we've been going through. One is the conscientization, the awakening, the reawakening of people to know that this is, first of all, their land. They have right there. They don't live there by permission of anybody, and that they can assert their right to regain confidence, to regain faith in themselves. That is one of the most difficult processes that one can go through when people have been dominated for so long. Fear is one of the biggest problems to deal with, to dispel in these people, because they have been living in fear for over 100 years. In fact, fear has become cultural. It is within our sayings. We glorify cowardice. There are words in our language which say, in the home of the cowards, they are laughing. In the home of the brave, they are crying. So the lesson, it's okay to be a coward. So even if I step on you, just to remain calm and hope that one time I will go away. And there are sayings like, it's better to be humiliated than to die. That is those are the sayings that you grow up hearing. It's better to be humiliated than to die. So even if you are humiliated, be happy that you are still alive, and one day the humiliation somehow will go away. We have to change this. And I've quite often been questioned, if you know that, frankly, the election is not going to cause change in itself, why do you go? And the reason, indeed, we go is because it's a unique opportunity to reach the ordinary people. It's not easy on any other day, save for those days that have been set aside for this scene, for the international community to realize that there is an election going on and cameras to come and capture scenes of rallies. On any other day, it is extremely difficult. Just before I flew out here, we had a meeting at our party headquarters, and I could not leave because it had been barricaded off by the time the meeting ended. Happily, we have learned survival mechanisms. As the forces were still intensifying outside our gate, I found a way out, and I waved at them as I ran across. But that is, I have been pulled out of radio stations just to talk, give a talk. Because if you cannot reach them physically, at least because they brought harsh rules for organizing a public meeting. We have a law called the Public Order Management Act, which says if you want to organize 3 or more people to talk about politics, you need the authority, the permission of the Inspector General of Police. Not just any other policeman, but the Inspector General of Police. But to ridicule that, even now, talking from the radio station cannot be tolerated, so they can pull you out of the radio station. So elections, when they organize them for that, for their purposes, they offer us a unique opportunity to conscientize our people, to interact with our population and wake them up and strengthen them and give them confidence. And of course, faith is the biggest counter to fear. The more faith you have, the less fear you have. So we build faith in them and they become less fearful. Secondly, is to give them organizational competencies that they can pull and act together and speak together, building leadership networks amongst them. And again, doing this in a manner that will be undetected, because If you have known leaders, they are attacked, they are isolated, they are traumatized. So we create leadership networks that are not known. Now, once people are aware, awake, once they are organized, regaining their power is the easiest thing. And we believe that, as has happened elsewhere, indeed that is the way to go for communities like ours to regain power, by taking actions that will nullify, that will make the force of arms incapable of controlling the power of our people. Because you can imagine, you know, a country like Uganda is a rural country, largely. You know, 80% of the people live in the villages. If they chose, and they organized it, if they chose to say from tomorrow we are not going to send food to the market, in a week the soldiers themselves will run after their leader, because there will be, the prices would have gone up maybe 10, 20-fold. And the, you know, peasants can. And once they realize their power through their networking, and it happens incrementally through struggling in small fights over small things, and they realize they can achieve something. And this is what we've been building, you know. Some roads are very neglected. Peasants wake up and say, nobody will pass through this road unless it is repaired, and they close it. And in 1 week, they are busy trying to repair it, and now they know things can happen by their own effort. And so this is what we think will eventually cause the actual break, the actual fundamental change, that power will shift from those with guns to those without, that guns will be for the first time subordinated to our people. Now, once that happens, there is obviously a very tough job to do to now rebuild the society into a democratic one. The major ingredient would have been achieved, the conscientization, the awakening of the people. But you are talking about a transition where the entire economy is in the hands of a few, and people are totally marginalized. How do they, and part of the anger of causing the change is that marginalization. How do you reorganize so that you can have working public service, you know, that health, education, and so on can once again be available to ordinary people? These are questions that must be grappled with ahead of any such change. The institutions that ought to be built in a new constitutional framework need to be engaged with. The security, how will security be managed, and so on. And eventually also the now conscious building of a nation, because we are different nationalities forced to live together. So we must have a process of deliberately interacting, having a dialogue, and agreeing on mechanisms of how we consciously and willfully live together as a community. So there must be a process, and especially after the trauma that we have gone through, you know, the violence and killings and so on. We must have a truth-telling, justice and reconciliation process that then integrates the country, and then we can have free and fair elections, ending that kind of a transition. So this is how I have been trapped in becoming a perennial opposition person. I joined these processes without much consideration when I was 24 years. I'm now 63. And every day the burden on me to continue increases because of the many sacrifices that I see our colleagues that have made whom, if we didn't continue, those sacrifices would be in vain, including indeed many who have died. Sometimes people sympathize with us who are alive, but there are those who have, paid the ultimate sacrifice. So, with these few words, I'm glad to be here once again. Thank you very much.